I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook baby.
All right, we're recording.
Excellent.
Here we are. Welcome, my friend.
Hey,
I noticed the hair's grown out. When you start doing that?
I haven't cut it in over a year, so it's actually
Yeah.
very slow growing hair. I think it's thinning on top. I think I'm losing my shot at this, but
Are you getting Did you take anything?
No.
You should get some. Well,
maybe.
they do not advertise with us. I use Roman.
Oh, nice.
my
Okay.
hair. Yeah, Propecia. It's
Cool.
good.
Does it
Sorry.
work?
I think so. I know I'm wearing a hat right now. That's not really helping, but yeah, I'm happy with it.
Okay, cool.
Hair thickening shampoo. That's just getting older. How old are you?
Nice. 33.
Yeah, I'm gonna be 33 in about a month and a half.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
yes.
fascism.
Fashion.
Fascism.
Yeah. So we've kind of touched on fascism sort of briefly in our last two podcast encounters.
I probably touched on fascism too much for
well, I
for
think
some
last
people's
time we
liking.
subjected you to like a quiz show about it, right?
It was authoritarians. Were they all fascists? I think they were all different flavors
Yeah,
of
probably all different
authoritarianism.
flavors.
So I'll start by saying this was very interesting, this being what you sent me from Mussolini.
Oh, the doctrine of fascism.
Yeah, our good friend Mussolini. I think that's a place to start.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, I mean, fascism is like white supremacy and racism. One of those terms that's thrown around all the time. And I don't think people, and it's kind of fun. Like I used to say it from The Big Lebowski, you kind of just call anyone who uses force and authority as a fascist.
Right.
But this, like the actual doctrine of it, and a lot of people also kind of go straight to Nazis, which was its own flavor of fascism.
Right.
Which that I don't think we're going to talk much about. We can, but really, this was really interesting. So it was a lot more articulate than I thought it was going to be. Right. Maybe I just thought Mussolini was like this big Guido meathead who was not going to be very articulate, but it is. I know it is translated, but
right. Yeah, maybe when you read it in Italian, it's not.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Italian just makes it all kind of sound flowery.
Right.
But
yeah. So what did you think of? So the writing style you're saying comes off as much more sort of like thoughtful, maybe.
It's definitely. I could see how this could inspire people. There's a lot of, if I had to boil. Sorry, my cat's being very annoying. Move. If I had to boil it down to like what is the essence of fascism,
right?
It's, well, I had a quote here. Well, fascism is a manifestation of the spirit, and I think fascism is like the spirit of man, or that's what it tries to be as like a political ideology,
right?
So let's get into it a little. I also like at the top I wrote doctrine of action.
Yes. Yeah.
You can see also how this could be attractive, especially to like young men.
Right.
Like especially disenfranchised young men. It's a lot of, I mean, there's a reason
much like Jordan B. Peterson.
Yeah, like Jordan P. I'm not calling him a fascist at all, because fascism is
I don't think he is a fascist.
No. And he's much more of just like he's more in like the manosphere type thing.
Right.
I don't know. I know him from like other podcasts. I don't know him, let's say, from as many primary sources. I know him from like I guess a primary source is him being on a podcast. So it's not his podcast. It's not his writing. It's
right.
It's, and I like some of what I've heard from him. Some of it I think he gets a little over the top.
Sure.
But I also think he has like severe like health issues that are affecting him.
Like it. Yes.
Yeah. So let's dive in here to Mussolini's fascism. Would you say, is he like the godfather of fascism, or like modern fascism?
Modern
Yeah.
fascism. Well, I mean, I think in terms of the idea of fascism, he's sort of, at least historically, thought of as the kind of intellectual progenitor of the idea, or at least the
Yeah.
guy who made it famous, right? The guy who made it big.
Sure, but what, like, wasn't the Roman Empire, like, weren't they fascist? And like isn't that where he
Well,
like
he likens his form of fascism to
I see.
the Roman Empire, but I don't know, his brand of fascism, at least to me, feels very 20th century, and this is kind of like what
Yeah.
I was emailing with you about the
Mm.
connection between American progressivism and fascism,
Yeah.
because
There's
I actually
definitely parallels here.
right, and I
Yeah.
actually see Nazism as being very similar, and communism. There's these four, I see, like, pillars of these kind of
Authoritarianism.
universalistic movements that happen in
Yeah.
the early 20th century. And
Yeah.
so I see them as kind of all different versions of each other, with communism being different in some important ways. But
Totally.
fascism feels like maybe just a different brand of what we call progressivism, or what they called Nazism.
I think it's definitely a brand of authoritarianism, and he doesn't like that's not like hidden. That's
No, he doesn't
not
shy from it at
yeah,
all.
that's
No, no.
yeah, that's very much part of it. I think where we're gonna see the progressivism is in the morality of fascism.
Yes.
Where the rejection is the rejection of let's get into it
Yeah.
specifically. So here so here's an example of here's a passage where I think this is very much like attractive to young men, and it's very
Right.
empowering and emboldening. He says here, this is page 238. Thus, the fascist accepts life and loves it, knowing nothing of and despising suicide. Rather does he conceive of life as duty and struggle and conquest, life that should be high and full, lived for oneself, but above all, for others, those who are at hand and those who are at far distant, contemporaries and those who will come after. That section of this paragraph is really you can see how that makes people like want to join groups and spread their ideology and like live that full life. It's not pessimistic like so many
Right.
I think left-wing
Right.
left-wing movements are, where Marxism and
Mhm.
and he gets into Marxism.
You're right.
It's so much like everyone's against you, everyone like you're fucked. You can never get out of this cycle unless you like completely create a revolution. Like fascism here is about like, no, life is great if you like follow this, like you have more free will,
Right.
and all you have to do is kind of like take action.
But even in there's a little trick, because it
Mhm.
makes it sound like you have free will even if you take action. But
Mhm.
there's that little thing in there about you're serving yourself and you're serving your society or whatever. So it's ultimately he's still trying to get people to service his worldview.
Well, the trick is that it's later. He doesn't say it here. He says it later that he says above all for others. Those others then become the state. That's what it is. It's
Right.
about serving. It's like he kind of vacillates with individualism. Like
Right.
he very much criticizes liberalism. He criticizes democracy, socialism,
Mhm.
and even capitalism.
Yes.
And he talks about how it's all about like what the state is. And I think this is where this is very different from a lot of right-wing libertarians, where
Yes.
this is like the scariest shit. Like right-wing libertarians, I don't know if you identify as one, but like that's where
Yeah.
this like completely terrifies
Yeah.
someone with that political persuasion.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is like look, I try and read this as a like political exercise, not as in like what we know happened, how this actually manifested,
Right.
just like as an ideology. Like a lot of this is really interesting. It's very
Mhm.
inspiring. Some of it facially, no, it is.
Yeah.
Some of it facially, I also find very disturbing. Like
Yes.
not even knowing what happened about it, how like he basically says civil liberties suck, checks
Yeah.
and balances just get in the way, which I think there's
Absolutely.
an argument to that sometimes. But it's why they exist.
Well, they're supposed to get in the way.
Yeah, exactly. And like there are definitely things in here that fit. It's not like, oh, I'm not being one of those people like a lot of Marxists do this. It's like, oh, well, if you just do it right, it's actually great, even though every single time it's ever done, it leads to like death and destruction. Like, I'm not saying that at all. I don't think it's like, oh, we just do fascism the right way, it'll work. Like, no, even within his ideology, it's scary. That being said, some of it I find very persuasive.
Right.
So I don't know. I had some questions. So first, my first question was like, do you think is fascism elitist?
Absolutely.
Okay. Why do you think so?
I think the idea of the purpose of society being ultimately to serve the state is sort of a pyramid scheme of sorts.
Yeah.
And I would consider that elitist because as you get closer and closer to the top, you narrow down who's involved. And it's the mass of people serving the elites up top and their ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that any state system is essentially elitist in some way.
Yes.
Including monarchies and things like that. Like any form of system where...
I mean, that's literally the most elitist, right?
Right, of course, of course.
But like I'd say communism, I mean, there's still...
Right, communism is anti-elitist, at least in...
Well, in theory.
In theory, right.
Yeah, but in practice, there's always the leaders who live in palaces while their people starve.
Right.
And make the decisions for everyone else. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I definitely think fascism is elitist. Who those elites are, like the flavor of elitism, is where I think it changes from like liberalism, from communism.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I think that what fascism does is it grapples with power in a much more honest way than like liberalism and the kind of soft elitism that we tend to be engaged with, like professors and things like that, like people who are like kind of good at thinking and stuff, but they're not really grappling with what real power is.
I think
the idea of
like the administrative state,
the health of the state, that kind of a thing.
Like our elitism are institutions in the administrative state, I would say.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of them are kind of faceless. I don't know. I guess they've always been faceless. Maybe they're more front-facing now. If you say like people like Dr. Fauci or head of or what's her name, Walensky, and like people like that. The Jamie Dimon, like these sorts of people are, and that's just our technology has created that. But I agree with like the soft elitism versus, I guess, hard elitism, or like what I was saying, like people living in palaces. Like,
right.
It's a totally different. It's a lot more visible.
Right, and then also thinking about even going back to ancient Rome, the idea of a powerful state with warriors, a state that is conquering and trying to rule other states.
So let's talk about Rome, because I had here where he actually gets into what fascism is, and he doesn't get to this till later. I have a note here about the Roman Empire, and like what I know about the Roman Empire, they like to become Roman didn't have to do with race or really even geography. As the empire expanded, like people of all, like North Africans and Britain, like Celtic people and Anatolians and like all these people, what we would call like the Balkans, the Gauls, like all these people became Roman. It's the reason the Bible spread was because of Saul, who became Paul, and he was a Roman citizen who could, because he was a Roman citizen, he could travel more freely throughout Rome, and you had certain rights throughout the empire, and you had certain rights, and that's why there are cities built in certain ways in places like Algeria and Egypt and England and parts of Western Germany. And I appreciate that. Like when it comes to, we're going to like bring it to, like the United States does generally a really good job of assimilation. And I do think our culture is our biggest export. As much as I say, besides obesity, our culture is our biggest export. And I do think that like I like our mix of multiculturalism and nationalism. But if I had to pick one or the other, and I think the two biggest opposites here are the British, the UK being multicultural, and the French being, I guess, assimilation. Like I actually I lean a lot more towards assimilation. Like I do think I was talking about this with Joe actually on our last episode. It's not out yet, but like I get kind of tired of, it's usually like the like white Protestant countries of the world, and I still consider us that in practice, like in culture, how like you're like constantly apologizing for everything and negative about everything. And no, I think like that's not to say you should say like you're supreme and better than everyone else either. I think like every culture should celebrate their positives and also reconcile with their negatives. But it seems like, and we're talking about statues, like the most evil motherfucker who ever lived arguably was like Genghis Khan, right? If you go to Mongolia, they have a gigantic statue of Genghis Khan in Ulaanbaatar. Like they celebrate him, and he was so like, he made like people like, I'm not going to put $1 in the Nazi jar here, so I won't say Hitler, but like the worst people of the 20th, 21st, 20th, 19th centuries, like Genghis Khan was infinitely worse. He was so horrific, and they celebrate him there. And I think it might be a time thing also, but we're pulling down statues of Abraham Lincoln, right? So,
but we also celebrate. I feel like the whole celebration thing, though, like people will celebrate anything. I don't know, like people celebrate Fauci, and I consider him like one of the most evil people on the planet. So.
I do too. I tweet many times. I think Fauci should be Daddy Fauci should be in prison.
Right. But it's like, it's really weird. I don't know. I feel like there's no.
Well. So to bring it back to Mussolini here, when you read this, you notice how many times he talks about history. Again, this is why I think it attracts social conservatives, because it's not about erasing history. It's about preserving history, and that's honestly like really a big part of Mussolini's, I guess, tolerance of religion. Maybe that's too harsh, but it is because of the history of religion and how it plays in the culture. And that's why you hear a lot of social conservatives who are actually not religious and sometimes even atheists say like, no, but we still have the tenets and the culture of Judeo-Christian values. And you can see the overlap here with why that's important. Unlike Marxism, which he says, wants to create a new God. Like the Bolsheviks want to basically get rid of religion. That's what they say, but really they want, like, their ideology is religion. Which I find very scary.
But where I feel like, so the fascist side of it is maybe more cynical in a way, because I feel like it's the weaponization of religion. It's the use of the traditional ideology to capture the hearts and minds of people, rather than tearing it down and trying to build something new. The Marxists, in a way, have a harder road ahead of them, because what Mussolini can do is he can stir up these traditional emotions and draw it back to Rome. I mean, how amazing is that? We are the Italians. We are the descendants of the Roman Empire.
Well, he wanted
which became the Holy Roman Empire. Like, I mean,
he wanted to create Rome again. That's why he was so interested in Egypt and like that part of Africa, because that was really the breadbasket of the Roman Empire.
But this is this thing. It's really weird. I noticed it in the restorationist Christian movements in the United States about how you can stir people up about believing that you can recreate something ancient. Because there's this whole movement of people who believe that they're worshiping the way that the apostles would have worshipped in the first century. And it's like, you have no idea.
Wait, what? I don't know. What is this movement? Restoration?
The Restorationist movement. So
that's like current? That's like going on?
Yeah. So they don't go to churches. They don't like churches. They don't like, they don't celebrate holidays. They don't celebrate anything that has any whiff of paganism or anything, because they wouldn't have done that in the first century.
Right. And that's how Christianity spread to so many parts of the world and was accepted in places like, Haiti and Mexico and Africa, because it combined those traditional beliefs, even still today. Like, I mean, I was just in New Orleans, and voodoo, people always think like the dark parts of voodoo, but voodoo is actually just like a totally normal syncretic religion of traditional African, like traditional West African, I think, and like Christianity. It's had that own flavor and had a few dark parts of it, and I think that's more of like the hoodoo part. Anyway,
Like, but that's like this cynical side to what I consider like the trio that's separate from communism of Nazism, fascism, and progressivism is the weaponizing. It's like it feels very cynical to me. The use of these traditional ideas to stir up people's hearts and use their own traditional values in service of, glorifying the fascist state or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think they would say the ends justify the means, right? Like whether it's the church.
Well,
spreading,
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like the church spreading. It's like, oh, we don't care if they incorporate some local customs. Like they're still, going to heaven and accepting Christ as their Lord and Savior. And,
right.
Peru.
Yeah. I mean, of course.
That.
And, or helping to build the wonderful fascist state where.
Yeah. So, right. So we were on the Roman Empire. So he talks about how like actually empire is a part of fascism. Now, I think he has some like contradictions in here because the Roman Empire spread and it started incorporating so many different types of people that had different customs and views. And then more of those people like the Foederati were like Germanic mercenaries, basically, who they didn't have that as much as the empire tried. They didn't have that connection to Rome. Some of them had never even been to Italy. They had loyalty to their generals.
Yeah.
And when the empire spreads, it gets too thin and it honestly becomes too diverse to have this cohesion.
Right.
And it it crumbles. And I think here, because he talks about the solidarity of humanity, but I think this is coming from a place that's like a very homogenous Italy, while like ethnically Italy is extremely diverse. Right. But at this time, you had Germanic peoples, you had Italic, Gallo-Roman peoples, you had Arabs, Normans, like all types of peoples in there. But at this
time, are you talking about ancient Rome, or are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about like now
Italy in the 20s and 30s.
20s and 30s, and even now, Italy, like what is an Italian is a very diverse thing.
Right.
Like Lombardy is named after the Lombards, which were Germanic people.
Right.
Like Norman, the Normans were these Scandinavian French-speaking Vikings who ended up in southern Italy and Sicily and mixed with the Arabs and the Byzantine. Like it's all over the place. But here, like at least here, it's very much like all that is not necessary. They weren't taking 23andMe. It was you spoke Italian, you were some shade of white, and you were Catholic.
Right.
And but as an empire spreads, it's going to diversify. And I think here he doesn't really account for the diversity, and he just kind of assumes, I think, that everyone will like just fall in line.
Well, I think the thing is that like nation states as Italy and Germany were at the time were still relatively those countries were relatively new to being states in that way.
Yeah.
Like a little less than 100 years old.
Yeah.
Which is
Germany was like 50, like the way we know Germany now.
48 or something.
I think it was 1870.
Oh, was it that late? Okay.
I think it was 70 or 71 maybe.
Yeah.
And Italy was maybe later than that. He talks about Garibaldi in here.
Right.
He says like liberalism didn't do shit. These guys did it. Like says right here, as for Italian unity, its debt to liberalism is completely inferior in contrast to that which it owes to the work of Mazzini and Garibaldi, who were not liberals. Had it not been for that. And then he talks about like basically liberalism's height, which was 1830 to 1848, I guess, or maybe it's the 1870s.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So anyway, so I don't want to get too much about the historical part of it,
but I feel like it's important in that it's this weird time in political ideology because of the rise of sort of like the bureaucratization of states around Europe and Africa following that, and Asia, and like there's this whole crazy thing that's happening where the world is being transformed administratively. And like the world now is way more fascist than I think anybody probably could have imagined in the 1800s.
Well, I've considered writing an article and making the argument that like America is a fascist country, just not in the way you think.
Right.
being like we're not like a Nazi country. We're not even like a Mussolini, but like how I always what I always thought of fascism was the lack of a separation between like all institutions
Mhm.
and corporations. I mean, here he
Right.
talks a lot about the corporation,
Yep.
and it's hard to argue. Like I thought of this argument when you start seeing, well, the government just bails out the banks and bails out and bails out universities and tells Twitter who to censor and things like that. And when you don't have that separation, this is just one state. Like it's not it's not the what do they call it? The I don't know, the pillars, the columns. I forget what they call these different things, but not even like I'm not even talking like a executive, legislative, judicial. I mean, like our biggest institutions and markets are completely at the whim of the government, and vice versa. Like, and that's also the thing. It's also the government is completely bought by the big banks and the lobbyists and the airlines, and so it goes both ways.
There is no distinction. I feel like that's like if I had to think of the three main aspects of modern American society, which are big aspects, that I would argue that we are basically living in a fascist state, like a la Mussolini, would be exactly what you're talking about there not really being any true distinction between the corporate world and the government world.
Yeah.
Our perpetual engagement in wars with other countries in the name of controlling the behaviors and actions of those countries and those people.
Empire.
Exactly. And then also the governmental relationship with the news media, which is another thing that Mussolini talks about a lot, about the news media essentially being a tool, being a mouthpiece. Because if you can, I don't remember if he says it in the Doctrine of Fascism or other things, but he talks about how the news media is there to create what is reality.
Yeah, he doesn't say that in here, but that's
but the idea is that the news media can say anything, and then that will become reality. Like the news media's job is to create what the world is for the people of the state.
Yeah, so and I agree, and I think that's why I do believe that out of any, like we're not socialist. I argue that we have parts of socialism and we have corporate socialism. We're not. I don't, as much as the Democrats fetishize democracy, like we're not a true democracy. It's a joke. They won't even have primaries, for instance. They screw over third parties.
California kind of tries to do the true democracy thing.
How do they try and do it?
Like if in your state, there's usually propositions on the ballot.
Yeah.
And in a lot of states, that's basically just a suggestion to the legislature.
They have more direct democracy.
In California, if there's a proposition on the ballot, whatever the people vote on, that will become the new law.
And aren't they much more liberal, for lack of a better term, with recalls? Like that's not as common.
I actually don't know what the recall rules are.
Like they.
I know there was a recall in Wisconsin when I was living there.
Of what? The governor?
Yeah, Scott Walker.
Did they recall him?
No, no, they got a recall. It was exactly what happened in California. They got a recall to happen, and then the opposing side, the Democrats, couldn't put up somebody who could beat him, even after getting a recall.
Right. I just thought California was one of the easier states.
It might be
someone. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean,
I don't know if it's good or not, but
are you in California now?
No, I'm in Texas.
You're in Texas. Do you split time or no? You more in Texas now?
No. I mean, I go back for gigs and stuff, but I live in Austin.
So. I live in Austin.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Right. So, and I think maybe I should have started with this. Like a good way to, and I caught myself writing these notes as I was reading, but a good way to visualize fascism is like where the term comes from, like the fascisti, the bundle of sticks, and each stick. Like a stick is an individual thing, right? Like you can pull out a stick, but it's strongest when you're together. So, because he talks about individualism, like there is some individualism in fascism, but it is secondary. And we're stronger as the bundle of sticks. The more sticks are bundled together, the stronger we are. But then there's the axe at the top of it. And that's exactly what he talks about. I want to find his quote he says, I wrote a note here, 243. He says, sorry, I want to quote him.
The individual not being annulled but multiplied thing.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting quote I wanted to get to. Why can't I find it? Well, okay, let's talk about that while I look for this.
Sure.
I make like so many goddamn notes. I can never find anything when I start recording. Like this
Yeah.
whole thing is written up. I have a whole page of notes here.
Oh no.
But anyway, yeah, so that's a great quote.
I mean, it's interesting with this idea of individualism and pluralism. I mean, it sounds essentially it sounds like a lot of democratic talking that we're used to hearing. You know, like out of the e pluribus unum, it's sort of the opposite of that in a way, right?
Out of
many one,
out of many one, and then out of one many,
something like that. Out of one's many, or something like that.
Yeah. So he
like
says
the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, kind of a thing.
Right. Yes, that's how I would put it. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The individual in the fascist state is not annulled, but rather multiplied, just in the same way that a soldier in a regiment is not diminished, but rather increased by the number of his comrades. The fascist state organizes the nation, but leaves a sufficient margin of liberty to the individual. How nice.
Sufficient. Yeah.
Sufficient,
Thanks, dude.
just enough. The latter is deprived of all, and I love this one, which I want to talk about, but all useless and possibly harmful freedom.
It makes me. It really, really reminds me of
1984.
Well, I was gonna say 2020.
Oh, yes.
Well, yes. What was it? Necessary business or whatever the hell it was. Only what was necessary could be open. There were all these terms. I don't remember.
Employee. What was it?
I don't know.
I'm so mad. I'm blanking. Someone would be screaming at us right now. Not requisite, not necessary. It'll come to me. But yes, I was thinking more though. Like, I do look.
I'll look.
Listen. Just listen to me real quick. I would have, if I read that in 2019, right? And I'm gonna flip this on its head. 'Cause I see what you're saying with like the unnecessary freedom or harmful freedom, right?
Yeah.
But I do think there is a side of like, especially the left-wing libertarianism, like you're looking at the quadrant, the bottom left.
Yeah.
That is harmful. Like I do believe.
I mean, the bottom left is the most confusing of all things to me.
And honestly,
because I feel like they have an intrinsic contradiction in their idea.
It's very strange. And whenever I take that test, I am in that quadrant every time. I don't know. I'm surprised myself.
Right.
I don't know what, but I am like firmly in that quadrant when I take that test. And yet I think that quadrant.
Are you like an anti-private property person?
No, that would be the top left.
Well, no, but so what I've read, at least about left libertarians, and I don't quite understand the position, is that they think that there should be no state. However, also there's no such thing as private ownership.
No, I'm private property is probably one of my most right-wing libertarian views.
Right. Okay.
I very much like when I'm a regular listener to like Jacobin and reader of Jacobin and like those socialist. I am, and that's where like I'll agree with Ben Burgess on a lot of things, and then he'll start about like getting but my question is like, okay, then who owns it? Because someone's going to own it, and it's going to be like I don't.
I mean, ownership is a confusing topic, at least.
The
legitimacy of ownership is a hard road.
Where I'm yes, but to answer your question, no, I'm the opposite of the like there shouldn't be private property. I think private property is very, very important.
But harmful freedom.
Harmful freedom is like the ACLU arguing that people can camp wherever, and bringing food and like enabling is basically harmful freedom. Like people can shoot up drugs wherever they want. I believe and I don't know why it's so hard to reconcile. I argue with people on both sides about this. I argue with people like boomers and conservatives about this, and then I'll argue with like left-wing people about like drugs. Like I don't think drugs. I think drugs should be decriminalized. I think a lot of them should be legal. However, it's not like I can go start slugging a bottle of whiskey on the sidewalk and sleep there, right? That is illegal. So enforce that. So like, okay, I don't think you should go to prison for doing heroin. I also don't think that you can shoot up in a park where there are children and that you can make that space your own. Like, I don't think these are that hard to reconcile either.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the harmful freedom comes from the enabling, letting people, like, I don't think you should be able to walk into a Walgreens and steal $899 worth of exactly. It's harmful freedom, and saying, well,
that's not freedom though. Hang on.
But how is that not freedom? Going into a store and stealing whatever you want, that's like the most free thing.
Yes. Okay. So there is like the atomized freedom of anybody has any freedom they want because they are the only individual. There's that idea. So like, the owner of Walgreens doesn't matter. The employees at Walgreens don't matter because all that matters is you, like a true, like solipsistic ethic. But I don't think most people hold that. I would say, though, that it isn't actually freedom in the way that we're talking about it to go and steal something from somebody else. I think the idea of sleeping in a public space is confusing because my belief is that public essentially means the sum total of stolen goods. So I see public spaces as things.
You don't believe in taxation, right?
I don't. Well, I believe in it.
Right. Well, you don't think it should exist.
No, I do not.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of stuff where we would differ. Like, I'm very much, I believe in a lot of like certain types of welfare and things like that. But I also believe in private property. Like, I believe in like social. Like, I believe in socialism for like poor people, not for corporations, and not for airlines, and not for big banks.
Sure,
like that's where I believe in socialism, and also like not even for poor people, for like all types of people, like families. I believe in the child tax credit. I don't care if you make $400,000. I think you should get it. Like, I think lots of people should get these. So anyway,
But I'm interested. So with the Mussolini thing and the harmful freedom, and my like snarky comment about 2020, I think it's funny that he keeps peppering this little individual thing in there because I don't think he's an individualist at all.
No, I don't.
He's right. He's obviously a collectivist. Everything he's talking about is the collective of the state, and even saying things like depriving people of harmful freedom and leaving a sufficient margin and all that silliness.
Yeah, I mean, he does.
Like, I don't know. I guess that's just to make people feel a little bit better, because if you say you will be in chains and every movement that you make will be controlled, nobody would get on board with that or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just feel like, who is he fooling here?
Well, he fooled a lot of people.
But like, I don't know, like, who thinks that a GI, like a general infantry in the military, that's not an individualistic job. Even if they get to, decide what color socks they wear, they probably don't even get to do that.
So here's where I think it is. I think it's individual in the sense of like, where a Marxist, let's say, and probably Marxist scholars would debate me on this. I don't know.
Right.
But like, Marxists would be like, it's the means of, it's seizing the means of production. It is all, it's all for, let's say, the state. Right. Or whatever, or whatever you want to call it. With Mussolini, I read it as it's individual in the sense of that it's your self-empowerment. It's your betterment because you are a part of this bundle of sticks, like, because you are a part of the state. So it's individual in that sense.
Yeah.
It's individual and like, no, this is good for you too. They might be the same thing. I'm not defending it. What I'm saying
I know.
I think that's what he means. It's spirit. Like, do you know how many times he says spiritual in this? Like, it's individual, and it's your self betterment. You're being the Ubermensch. You are ascending. You're living life to the fullest. And by doing all of that, by following this moral code, which I want to get into, and by being a part of this, like, we are actually building the perfect society, like the best that society can be.
Right.
That's where I think the individual is. I think as Americans, we think individualism a lot more of civil liberties, where he does not give a shit about that. Like he does not think.
That's what I'm saying. He's not actually an individualist in that he's perfectly willing to use and sacrifice anybody else to serve his goal. So this is where I don't think that there are very many individualists. The idea that
Okay.
you have access, it's like even when we were talking about welfare or something,
Mhm.
the idea that you have access to somebody else's resources to do what you want with them
Mhm.
because you think that, you know, it should help this person or it should go to here or whatever you think that you should do with them is if somebody else is a tool to your means,
Mm.
that isn't an individualist in terms of, that's maybe like what I was saying before, like solipsistically individualist, like
Mhm.
you are the only individual. But in
Yeah.
terms of believing in the individual as an abstract, I
Mhm.
don't think it is really at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that. So I want to see. So I made all these notes here. So we talked about like the manifestation of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about so yeah, he talks about let's go to the spirit of fascism. This is on page 238.
Okay. The spirit of fascism.
Spirit of fascism.
That sounds like a good.
Someone's gonna crop that out of this and just use it against me in a deposition sometime. Okay, so oh wait, I read that part already. Oh, here's one part I just want to read so let's talk about some of the scary parts of this because he uses this term. He uses this term called, he says this demographic policy of the regime is a result of the above premise. Thus, the fascist loves in actual fact his neighbor, but this neighbor in quotes is not merely a vague and undefined concept. This love for one's neighbor puts no obstacle in the way of, and I underline this next part, necessary educational severity. And still no less differentiation of status and physical distance.
I love necessary, man. It's
Necessary
really
educational. Okay, so hold on. In order to live worthily in the community of civilized peoples, watches its contemporaries with vigilant eyes.
Oh yes.
This is like
the walls have ears. Yes.
Yeah, this is the like 1984 shit. This is the kind of scary like Soviet stuff.
Yeah.
Where I think you brought up 2020. We bring up 2020 a lot on the show. And 2021 and even today, like this is the kind of shit like telling on your neighbor for having 4 people in their house, not wearing masks, not getting boosted, like this kind of stuff is like straight from fascism. Like, well, I do think
it's not just fascism though; it's all of it.
It's I think though, but I do think so. We were just talking about this. Like, I think a lot of people during the pandemic felt like a fascist. Not they didn't know that, but they felt like I am a single person who can do good, be part of this bundle of sticks that can hashtag save lives if I tell on my neighbor, if I tell someone to put their mask on, things like that, and to educate them. Like how much about the race shit did we see about like educating people on it? I'm going to do better. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to listen. I'm going to learn. Like honestly, this was necessary educating with severity that a lot of these crit people did during that time. And then you pair that with the authoritarianism of the COVID regime, which again, we're talking about like, I do like to, there were some people from, my camp, like the left wing side of, you want to say libertarianism, which I don't label myself any of those, but who were also against these lockdown things. But by far it was the right wing libertarians who were most outspoken. And that's one of my most right wing libertarian views is the anti-COVID regime, which I think was horrific and honestly like shocking that it happened. Still shocking to me that it happened the way it did. This shit happened. Like vigilant eyes, the necessary educational severity, which that's very that I think that's very scary. And I think that, but I do believe that people thought of themselves individually as, I can be a part of the greater sum of like a part of the greater sum.
I mean, it's an attractive thing for a lot of people. For me, the big takeaway of stuff like this is that, we talked about at the beginning how the word fascist or Nazi, blah, 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 gets thrown around a lot. People use it in a name calling way to mean like you're a bad person or something like that. Right. But actually, it's ubiquitous. We all, I say we all, I mean most people I know probably would be fine with like 60% of this stuff, and a bunch of the stuff is going into place now, as long as their person said it
100%.
and they'll be like, yeah, this is a great of course we have to fight for the greater good.
Yeah.
And then as long as their person is saying what that greater good is, they'll be like, yes sir.
Well, here's another part where you see this a lot on the progressive left.
Yep.
You hear this term a lot. It's, well, don't you want to be on the right side of history? How much of history is Mussolini talking about, right? It's this focus on history. How will we be remembered? And there's almost this like an obsession with being on the right. And first of all, you won't be. No one will be, because it'll always change. And I don't believe that the arc of history bends towards, I don't want to say justice, that's different, bends towards like more and more socially progressive. Like that's just not, I don't believe that's true. There are backlashes or push. I mean, if you look in the 60s, there was a backlash in the 60s that lasted like 3 decades, honestly. Still going on, maybe stopped at Obama-ish, like,
and we're also still talking about very short time periods.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's funny because like I had this argument about climate change the other day, which we don't have to talk about now, but like we think in very we think in narrow time frames, and I guess it makes sense because we don't live that long, and we know like up to our grandparents, maybe our great grandparents. So how far back do we have much connection to? Maybe 100 120 years or something. After that, it starts to become very distant and difficult to wrap our heads around. But what kind of trends, if we go back for the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years, what are we looking at?
I mean,
yeah, I mean, he's trying with the Roman Empire thing.
Yes, I mean, yeah. So what I'm the parallel I'm trying to make is there's this fascistic obsession with history, with like these kind of fascists, these like classic fascists, and then with progressives, it's this obsession with, well, when we are history, we want to be remembered correctly, so we have to implement these draconian or whatever the rule is. I won't call them laws, but whatever the rules are, the social rules, like we have to be on the right side of that. And I do see those parallels.
Yep. I feel like what somebody brought up to me recently is it's interesting though that fascism, Nazism, and progressivism tend to try and influence with carrots.
Yeah. Okay.
Versus the communist uprisings in the 20th century were more just like, let's kill everybody.
Like with the stick, right?
Yeah. Like stuff in Cambodia with Pol Pot is just like insane.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that. I know he was a psychopath, and like probably one of the least talked about psychopaths of.
Yeah. Like the entire medical system, they said, was like Western bourgeois. So they killed all the doctors and all the medical researchers, and then they had teenagers just like do experiments on people to try and rebuild medicine.
That's so fucked. So talking about so that's
quite a stick.
Yeah, that is quite a stick. So he does like not little takedowns, he does takedowns of different ideologies. Like he starts with Marxism and socialism.
Yes. And, this is great. I was going to ask you if you considered, after reading this, fascism of the left.
So I consider it of the left. I think that's, if you're looking at it economically, yeah, of course. But I've thought that for a very long time.
Right.
Socially, because he's not dealing with the same issues then as we have now. But like you can see where the issue, like Mussolini's definitely not going to be like for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
No,
right? Like you can tell that like he's obviously imperialistic, which is like so like socially, he's also but social. I would say socially he's a lot more of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that manosphere, that like Ubermensch thinking.
Right. But like Franklin Roosevelt also would not have been for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, he interned the Japanese.
Yeah, of course. Right. Absolutely. I don't think anyone really. I don't think a lot of people today are for diversity, equity, inclusion. To be honest, I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, that's sort of funny that nobody's
Yeah.
really that for it, but everybody's doing
but
it.
people are afraid. It's that people in power are terrified of the people who are for it, and they're nominally for it, but it doesn't affect their. I think when it doesn't affect their bottom line, I think the second it starts affecting their bottom line, it is.
I mean, I like Dave Smith has this whole thing. I don't know. I don't know if you listen to him much.
Oh
but,
yeah.
I like his analysis of Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders when he was talking about the reason that Bernie Sanders could never get in is Joe Biden says to the corporations, like, don't worry, you're keeping your money, you're making as much money as you want. Just add this bullshit DEI thing, like nobody cares. Diversity training is nothing. Bernie Sanders is saying, no, you don't get to be a billionaire anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take your money away from you.
100%. And I was definitely a Bernie bro in like 2016.
Right.
I took a test back in like 2015.
Yeah.
It was like it was called like I Stand With. And it was like this really in-depth test. And I got Bernie Sanders. I'm like, who the fuck is Bernie Sanders? I was like, this is the person who most
nice. Yeah.
Most closely. And I was like, okay. And then he became, almost the nominee. And I was a big, I did end up voting for Hillary in 2016, kind of begrudgingly. I was very much like a shitlid back then. But
that's a good term.
Yeah, but I never, even during the craziest of that time, I was still very much against like this progressive race and culture bullshit, like shutting down speech and stuff like that. Even at my most like vocally progressive, I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, what do you mean you're not going to have this person talk at this? Like, to me, that was so foreign. And really my red pill was like, racism is the real virus. And I was like, okay, I need to start reevaluating like this shit. I guess a lot of times I'm kind of again, I don't ascribe to any ideology, but I do have a lot of sympathy for like sewer socialism and like what's called like white socialism pejoratively. It's kind of like devoid of this race, which I'm sure you and I would not agree on a lot of that stuff, but that's like more of ideology that I'm into instead of this like corporate progressive banner. I call it like banner politics, like Black Lives Matter or intersectional flag. I can't stand that shit. So anyway, so I want to, so basically he says, in my own words, Marxism is reductive and simplistic. It is void of like spirit. Again, like there's no fascism now and always believes in holiness and in heroism. Like, listen to that. Like, honestly, I'm getting kind of fired up here. Like that is to say, in actions influenced by no economic motive, direct or indirect. He has this great line about.
That's amazing. That's straight out of religion right there. You should want to do it because it's the right thing, not because you get anything from it, dude. And if you can convince people to do things for you for nothing.
Listen to, like, honestly, this reads kind of like a left-winger in the 1990s. Fascism denies the materialistic conception of happiness as a possibility. Like, what? That sounds like someone at Boulder in 1994. And abandons it to its investors, the economists of the first 7 Okay, so fascism denies the validity of the equation. I love this line. Well-being equals happiness. So this fascism denies this, that well-being equals happiness, which would reduce men to the level of animals, caring for one thing only, to be fat and well-fed, and would thus degrade humanity to a purely physical existence.
How is this not like a conservative Christian?
I know. I think that's a great line. I don't actually. I'm one of those people who like honestly believes government should only be doing things to make life better for people and should stay out of moral issues and should not be legislating how to live and what to say in those things. And it should be like giving like not funding wars and not helping corporations, but helping people, keeping us, well fed and happy. I do believe that in a way, like, and I don't know if that's Marxist, but I don't know, like government to me should be about those things, not about most of this other shit. Like, I do think government's way too big. I think it should exist and really profoundly in a handful of areas.
Right. Right.
And I do think one of those is like just making lives better for the citizens, because we're the ones who pay taxes and
Right.
create this country. Like, we're the ones who create the nation. It
Right.
shouldn't be giving billions of dollars to Ukraine. It shouldn't be bailing out corporations.
Right. They
It
should be
shouldn't-
our advocates. Since we
Yes.
pay union dues, they should be the union leaders who make sure that we get all the stuff.
Yes, and I'm a big union guy. So
Nice.
yeah. So that it, like, while I love that takedown of Marxism, I kind of like, I don't know, like, that doesn't sound that bad for me, but I do understand how Marxism is like vapid. It's so, I mean, honestly, it's so like hammer and sickle. It's
Right.
it's a cog. It's,
Well,
you're part of the machine, but it's still like, you should control the machine, but you're still a machine. Where fascism in this writing is about spirit and holiness and heroism and
because
our
it's
history.
totalitarian in the same way. The reason
Yeah.
I'm hearing Christianity in it is that
Yeah.
it's totalitarian in that, in theory, eventually everybody should be part of the fascist state.
So here's what I'll say.
It has to be everywhere. It has to get all around the whole world eventually.
Oh yeah, it's in the Bible. Go forth and preach the gospel to every living creature. It's
Right.
it's
All the corners of the
yeah. And I am a Christian, and I do
Right.
but I don't believe in forced conversion, and obviously the horrible ways that people have been converted over
Right.
the years, over history, really, for the vast majority of Christianity. But anyway, so my you probably will not like this. My personal favorite politician is we should do an episode on him if you'd like.
Sure.
He's a very controversial politician, and that's Huey Long, who was. You're not familiar with Huey Long?
Mm-mm.
He actually challenged Roosevelt. He was a Democrat. He was the governor of Louisiana, and
Okay.
he was like a dictator. Like in
Nice.
that video, do you know it can't happen here? Sinclair Lewis, the book.
No,
where, like,
no,
a
I need
fascist
to
dictator
look all this
rises
stuff up. All right.
Yeah, well, he modeled him off
Writing
of
this
Huey
down.
Long. Yeah,
Okay.
Huey Long was the fucking man. Look, he was not perfect. I just read a book on him. I'm going to read another, but
Nice.
I loved Huey Long. And I do love Huey Long, and he's kind of like my favorite sort of left-wing populist.
Okay.
And it, like, in that video game, I don't know what it is, but like in an alternate reality, an alternate history, like, he becomes the dictator of America.
Oh, nice.
Because yeah, I mean, he honestly thought Roosevelt didn't go far enough in a lot of the New Deal stuff.
Sure. Sure.
So he's very controversial. I love him though, because he did see the disparities in wealth in Louisiana, and how the oil companies and like a lot of super, super wealthy corporations and rich people controlled everything. And he like really did help poor and average people in like material ways.
Right.
So I appreciate that. And I don't know, like, but and people would say that, but he had like unchecked power that really an American governor had never had before.
Sure.
And that
Uh-huh.
he treated Louisiana like his kingdom. Anyway,
I mean,
and this just
it's sort of fun.
it's very
Gaddafi,
cool.
you know?
But it's the same. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing where it is kind of like Gaddafi, where like Gaddafi helped people like they read and they had like a good quality of living relative to like that part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you ask me, Gaddafi should have never gotten rid of his nukes, but whatever. So
I mean, so what would you say the distinction is? Because when I read this, the fascist writings or Nazi writings or progressive writings, I see basically it's all the same stuff.
how much Nazi writings are you reading?
I have a digital copy of Mein Kampf.
Yeah,
I haven't.
No, we read
It's
part of
long,
Mein Kampf.
dude.
We read part of Mein Kampf in college. Like, it's totally normal.
Of course. Yeah.
We read tons of stuff. We read the Communist Manifesto. We read
we read
the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. We read tons of shit. Darwin.
Malcolm X is fun. I like.
I read I have his biography on my bookshelf.
Nice. Anyway, but I basically see them as more or less the same thing, just different versions of totalitarian ideology.
Do you think communism and fascism is that narcissism of small differences?
Yes. Well, so communism I would put slightly different. I think that communism has some important differences.
Different
I think
from
what you're different than fascism.
Yeah, but small differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fascism and progressivism are essentially the same thing, and that there are important differences between fascism.
What do you mean by progressivism, though?
I mean Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt. I mean,
Yeah. Actually, coincidentally, do you know the History Impossible podcast?
No.
We had him on. His name is Alex, and Alex von Sternberg. He has a good podcast. It's
Cool.
called History Impossible. We had him on 2-3 episodes ago,
Nice.
and he actually just dropped an episode today. I'm going to listen to about. He says like it's like the first woke president ever, and it was Woodrow Wilson. Now he's terrible.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, actually, I have a whole thing where I think that Thomas Jefferson might be the first woke president.
Oh, really?
I feel like we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's such a fun statement because it's saying that we won't even examine what we're saying here. This is completely off
Kind of
limits.
true. I don't know.
There's no
Yeah.
argument for it. It's just true. And so you move from that. You move from an assertion of truth with nothing backing it, and then you can go anywhere. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, but
I guess I don't want to get too like are any truth can truth be self-evident or like we'll say that for another episode, but
But
Woodrow
the
Wilson,
difference
I know he was
is-
terrible. I can't articulate why, but yeah. So what are the differences to you between well, okay, so wait, what's your definition of progressivism?
I guess my definition of progressivism would be the use of state and corporate mergers
Yeah.
in the undertaking of sort of social engineering. So the idea that there's ways that we want the world to be. We want people to have these kinds of jobs, to act these kinds of ways, to think these kinds of ways. The most efficient way of doing that is to link up the state with the corporate world, because what the corporate world has is efficiency that the state will never have. But what the state has is power and resources that corporate world will never have.
I see.
And so like Margaret Sanger writes about that.
Yeah.
In like the idea of what a progressive is in the 1920s and stuff like that.
I see. Well, yeah, I guess when I think progressive, I think more just like the vapid social I think my cat's having a hairball back there. Sorry. Like the vapid social corporatist ideology of like, I don't know, Amazon or something.
Right.
Like that. I guess I think that of like really no foundation in any sort of economics or really trying to make lives better for people, just like the Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
Like I said,
the more modern ideas.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really
I think of it more with like Roosevelt and New Deal, that entire era.
That's probably more
like origins of Planned Parenthood, the First and Second World War.
Right.
All of this to me is the American brand of what was going on. Which what I love is Hoppe writes in Democracy, the God That Failed, that the world wars were actually not about what we think that they're about, and it was actually the new world versus the old monarchistic world. And it was the progressive and or democratic state. It was democracy versus monarchy.
What, World War I?
World War II, he says, is World War I. It's the same war.
Oh, okay. Well, that's something we can unpack. I think another episode. Sure. I don't know enough about. I've like Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive, right? Like
Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, I actually don't know as much about Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
When I think progressive, I think Woodrow Wilson, Margaret Sanger, Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we could talk about that another time. I guess I was thinking more like, to me, the progressive is like, in this house we believe signs with like NIMBY, like NIMBY in this house we believe signs, like MSNBC.
Well, but I think that's part of it. So I think where that is the puritanical nature of it. So that's the we need to be good elite people, with our college degrees and our correct beliefs and our blah 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 blah. It's all very conservative and
so fascism, Marxism, I don't know, like
Mhm.
What I mean, they rooted each other out.
Oh,
They
yeah.
executed like what are the differences? Honestly, like I don't fucking know, but I could like it'd be like, well, why are the Catholics and Protestants killing each other so much?
Sure.
Like, yeah, and that I think there are actually more. I think there are more
I mean,
differences
that's actually a
between
similar.
Protestant and I think there's more differences between a Protestant and a Catholic than there are
Yeah.
between a fascist and a communist.
Really?
But
Well,
like
because a communist, in a
probably.
sense, should
Don't
be.
quote me on that. I
No,
don't
it's
know.
okay. I think a communist should essentially be an anarchist or something close to an anarchist. And a fascist is like as non-anarchist as possible.
What? How is it? Wait, a communist is an anarchist?
Well, because actually, I think it relates a little bit to what we were talking about private property. I think it's all like a mix,
Hmm.
but like the idea of capitalism being where property is privately owned, socialism being where property is owned by the centralized state,
Okay.
and communism being where there is no property.
But that's what they always lose me. But like there is property. but like there is. Like it's there.
Well, but according to who is declaring it's owned?
I guess.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
so there's arguments that private property can't exist unless a state exists because there needs to be some system to legitimize it. Anyway,
Okay.
but I guess
Yeah.
that's the biggest difference I see is that
Mhm.
the goal is totalitarian in both cases, but the
Mhm.
goal in communism is it's to erase all of the past, to completely reform the world in a stateless way.
Mm.
And the fascist is trying to reform the world in a stateful way. And they
Oh,
probably both
yeah,
end up in
okay.
exactly the same place. I'm sure it comes all the way around.
Yeah, I think it's a horseshoe. But that's like Trotsky at communism, right? Like the
Sure.
like eternal struggle. Like it was more about creating one communistic state, right? I don't know. I do want to read more about Trotsky. He interests me, but we're on Mussolini today. So we're a little over an hour now. I do want to touch on some more things.
Sure.
Because he also kind of skewers democracy, which I love because I'm so fucking tired of people talking about democracy in this country, because it's bullshit. So he says here, after socialism, fascism combats the whole complex system of democratic ideology and repudiates it, whether in its theoretical premises or in the practical application. Fascism denies that the majority, by the simple fact that it is a majority, can direct human society. It denies that numbers alone can govern by means of a periodical consultation, and it affirms the immutable, beneficial, and fruitful inequality of mankind, which can never be permanently leveled through the mere operation of a mechanical process such as universal suffrage. There's a little more, but
right.
Let's unpack there.
I mean, I think he's correct.
Well, I think he's correct in like he's right.
Yeah.
Like that, but he's right as an inequality of mankind to an extent. I don't know if that's beneficial. If
right, but universal suffrage is also not going to stamp out inequalities in any way at all.
Well, I don't know what. I mean, I guess not, because then it would have happened because we have universal suffrage now.
Right.
Like honestly, but so this is where the Christian side of me is like, well, I mean, we are equal in terms of like our soul, like
right.
if you're a follower, if you're a believer. But I think the reality of it, like I'm very much also against the whole like equity initiative, like equality of outcomes.
We should all wind up in the same spot.
No, like that's moronic, a historical and a scientific. Like that's impossible and dumb and not something we should even strive for.
No.
But and I guess a lot of this, and I want to continue here, but a lot of this comes down to like whenever I start reading about fascism or communism or social or like all this stuff or things that like strongman, like even monarch. I've been like flirting with monarchism, like reading about it, interested in it. It's like, yeah, but democracy still is the best, shittiest one. Like they're all
Oh yeah, like
shitty.
the Winston
It's
Churchill
the
thing.
Churchill quote.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's democracy is the worst form of government except all those other ones or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's like it's kind of true.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
I don't know. It's democracy, and also I remember learning like in college. It's like, well, what is a democracy? People have argued. Like
Mhm.
this one guy, it's like democracy is literally just do you get to vote? That's it. If you get to vote or not. We a lot of times associate democracy with liberal democracy,
Right.
which has a lot more, attachment, has a lot more baggage with it.
Right.
Here, I think he's just talking about democracy because he has a whole separate section for liberalism.
Yeah.
So I'll continue. The Democratic, and this is where I literally have star deep state. The democratic regime may be denied as from time to time, giving the people the illusion of sovereignty, while the real effective sovereignty lies in the hands of other concealed and irresponsible forces. I'm like, hell yeah, brother. Yeah, it fucking does. Democracy is a regime nominally without a king, but is ruled by many kings, more absolute, tyrannical, and ruinous than one sole king, even though a tyrant.
I agree so much with that last part. That is my problem with democracy.
Yeah,
it forces us to be rulers of each other, and it actually pits us against each other. Because when I go to the voting booth, I am trying to control everybody else because I want my idea to be the law.
But
we're all little tyrants, exactly.
Yeah,
versus the one tyrant, and if they're bad, you just chop off their head.
No, but like if it was that easy, maybe. But like no, usually it's just civil war.
It's not easy. No, it's never easy.
Usually there's like a civil war. People get raped and murdered. Like
yeah, but it's not like that's not happening now.
Look, I said I've been flirting with monarchism. I'm very open-minded.
Anyway, I'm with Benito.
I'm with him on the deep state shit. I'm with him on this other stuff.
Well, but he likes that.
He likes it?
The deep state stuff. He doesn't like the democracy stuff. He's saying that it's important. Right? Am I
No, I think he's saying that this is why democracy fails, because it's actually not a real democracy.
Well, you can't have it because the state needs to serve its own interests.
Yeah, he's saying like he's speaking to, I think, people who like democracy here. He's saying
it's like it's an illusion.
It's an illusion. It's a rooster illusion. And I kind of agree with them. Like it's hard not to agree with them as an American right now. Like, does that mean we get rid of it's always we've diagnosed the problem. Well, what's the solution? I'm not saying fascism is the solution, which he is. I'm not saying monarchism is, which you are. I'm saying that,
I am. I'm not.
I'm saying that I think we just have to fix. We have to fix democracy. And honestly, how Marxism and how the Bolsheviks created the Marxist religion, it feels like there's a contingent of Democrats that are creating a religion of democracy, which is just not doing it for me. It's not doing it for me, guys. Like I think Republicans did this in the 2000s. These were the Bush years. That was more of about democratic empire, which I think was all bullshit and pretext for, oil and military contracts and all that shit, and just getting rid of people we don't like. But here, that didn't seem like a religion. If anything, the religion then was more patriotism. This is democracy. We have to preserve our democracy, and it does feel very much like we're supposed to venerate this idea that's like going to a fucking voting booth, like, and then they're gonna it's this Always Sunny in Philadelphia line. Am I gonna vote the Republican who's blasting me in the ass, or the Democrat who's gonna blast me in the ass? Like, and of course you can vote for third parties too, which I've done and might do again. So we'll see. But he talks a little bit here about republicanism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know.
I'm sure not meaning like George
what we
W.
have.
Bush.
No. I know that, but like people like Steven Crowder are always like, we're not a democracy, we're a republic, and like, yeah, that's true. Isn't that just like our electors?
As far as I understand it, republic means that the power in society comes from the people.
Versus democracy.
It's bottom up. Well, democracy has to do specifically with where political decisions are made.
And the power. I thought republic was like the Roman Republic, the Senate. Like that's why we have a Senate in 2023, which comes from
But
Rome.
they tend to go together. But republic having to do with the power existing in the public versus in the state. And then we try and say like the state is the public, right?
Yeah.
By 4.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something I would have to look more into. When I think republic, I just think more like instead of direct democracy, it's you have your electors. Like, you know, you're not actually voting for president, you're voting for the people who vote for president.
Right.
Like,
Well, that's like the whole representative republic thing.
Yeah, that's what I think of republic. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. And I don't care right now. I want to move on to so here I just want to note, so people don't think I'm too pro-fascist right now. I want to note that he says the principle that society exists solely through the well-being and the personal liberty of all individuals of which it is composed does not appear to be conformable to the plans of nature, in whose workings the race alone seems to be taken into consideration in the individual sacrifice to it. That sucks.
That sucks.
I disagree. I think like the well-being and personal liberty is one of the most important things for a government to do and should be preserving and should be out of a lot of other areas. I understand that there are conflicts there when people say like, okay, well then abortion or gay marriage or like somebody, I get that. I do. But personal liberty, like I do think that like the well-being of your population is and should be the absolute most important goal for the government, not lobbyists, not private interests, not these other things, which is completely different. Yeah. So he does say here, fascism denies in democracy the absurd conventional untruth of political equality, dressed out in the garb of collective irresponsibility and the myth of happiness and indefinite. He really does not like happiness, which is
he's an ascetic, right?
Yeah. Let me see. So he says fascism may write itself down as an organized, centralized, and authoritative democracy. So how I think of this, have you seen Starship Troopers? Yes. Or read the book? One of my favorites. So how I read this, and Starship Troopers is basically a giant fascist planet. They even have like Nazi inspired uniforms. But if you remember in Starship Troopers, there is not universal suffrage. Citizens get to vote. And how do you become a citizen? Through military, through basically joining the military, through enlistment. And there's that professor who makes that distinction between citizens and civilians. And I think like, that's kind of, and conservatives talk about this too. Like you should be able to, like, you have to earn the right to vote in a way. Like it shouldn't just be given to you. Certain people, like he kind of talks in here. I have a note somewhere about like low information voters. Like, no, it's not just because you're born here or you grow up or whatever it is. Like you have to give some sort of service. Or that's actually the line from Starship Troopers: service equals citizenship, which equals the right to vote. And I see that very much here. And I think that's what he means. We're a centralized and authoritative democracy where it's.
I mean, there's countries now where that happens.
Oh, are there?
Yeah. I mean, most Scandinavian countries and Israel.
Wait, what do you mean?
To gain full citizenship, as you have to enlist in military or some kind of civil service.
But you can still vote.
I don't think you can until you've done that.
Really?
Well, because you need to do it once you become an adult. I feel like it's all part of the pack when you go through the wash kind of a thing.
Really?
Because no children are voting or in the military.
Right. Like, but I know in Israel, for instance, like certain religious groups don't have to serve. Like Christians don't have to serve in the military,
and they probably can vote. Yes.
Sure. So again, this is one of those things. It's like I'm just equating like citizenship equals the right to vote. He doesn't use this term citizen in here. But I think that's what he's getting at is like there will be democracy, but it's not universal. You have to be part of the state. To become a part of the state, you give a service, whatever that is, right? And I think that's pretty persuasive to a lot of people, to be honest.
I mean, people like it.
I like it. I'm kidding.
Nice. Well, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. You tell me.
I tell you.
I'm definitely against what the Democrats want to do. Is like just keep lowering the voting age. Like that's so self-serving. You know why you're doing it.
Yeah.
I do like. I don't know. I also think civics needs to be focused on way more in in schools. But I'm sure.
I mean, there's this thing.
I'm sure you have a very different take on public schools than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have them, but.
Yeah, I know, Anthony. I think you and I think you and I talked about privatizing the roads in California when we were in LA. I'm like, oh boy, okay. Well, we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah.
For brevity's sake, I think we can skip. He definitely talks about collectivism. I think this idea. I think individualism in America gets associated with the right wing a lot, which then get associated with fascism a lot from obviously certain people. And I don't like those are definitely different things.
So where do you think that happened? That's something I'm very curious about because like Mussolini and Roosevelt were buddies until they went to war.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, and Mussolini was involved with Hollywood and stuff in the 20s.
Really?
Oh yeah. Like the progressive movement loved Mussolini, and they loved the fascist movement, and they saw each other as sort of comrades.
That's interesting.
Until World War II, it was a very like something shifted.
Yeah.
I think basically the progressives decided like, here's our chance to actually like win-win. We can take this whole thing, but where did that become right wing? Because I think about this with the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt. Like he doesn't really get attacked for interning the Japanese. We, as a sort of America's sordid history, involves interning the Japanese, but Franklin Roosevelt keeps hero status.
I think some of that's changing a little.
Yeah,
I think people look at it as because he had a D next to his name, even though what a Democrat and Republican were in the 20s and 30s is totally different than what they are now. I honestly think that if he was a Republican, he would get looked at differently. He's not given the same. Like it's like, well, he did a lot of good. He won World War II. The New Deal, I think, is generally considered a good thing
people like
to a lot of people. Yeah. So he did this one bad thing. It was also time of war, right?
One bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm being serious. I think that's the view.
I don't even think that they think about that with him. It's not even that he did this one bad thing. That doesn't come up with him at all. I don't think it's associated.
I do, but I think I think there's other where they're not giving the same to Lincoln because Lincoln was a Republican. But he said, and he freed the slaves and he won the Civil War, but he also said some racist shit about Native Americans. So he would tear down a statue.
Right. But then how did the fascists become this far right thing?
That's why I want to answer. One, I think that comes out of the 70s through like the 90s where skinheads and like right wing like racist. It became much more about the racist part of it.
Yeah, sure.
Which was, you know, when you have guys saying the N-word and attacking Jews and have swastikas, you know, tattooed on their bodies, and they want nativist policies and this kind of shit. It kind of went the whole the economic part of it and basically became just surface level like race stuff, kind of like what has happened with the left.
Right.
And then so they're doing Nazis, and Nazis, even though in the word Nazi they're socialist, they were fascists because they fought the communists who called them fascists, and the communists were on our side and they won. And even though the communists killed more Jews than the fascists did, they were still on our side. And where does fascism? What were the Nazis? Nazis come, fascism come from Mussolini, so they're right wing. Like I honestly think that's what it is. I think that's like
It's just that like racism is right wing, and they were racist, therefore they're right wing.
Correct. Even though I think that was much more of a Nazi flavor.
And why does racism right wing? Like where does that happen? I also don't understand that.
Well,
like the history of racism in this country is everybody.
Well,
and like the Ku Klux Klan was started by Democrats. Like,
well, that's Well, those
like
are
the Democratic
those
Party.
Are just word. Like, those are just parties. Those are just word. Like Lincoln, you know, like Martin Luther King was a Republican. Like that. Those are just parties.
No, of course, but like even through the 60s and 70s, that legacy is there. Like Lyndon Johnson was part of that whole movement.
Well, I see what you're saying. I don't think racism's right wing. Some of those racist people, some of those
No,
racists
I don't think you do. I don't think you
come
do.
from
I'm
Democrats.
more curious, like where this narrative comes from.
I think like there were some. I think like Nixon. I think embraced the white South and
Sure.
the moral majority, and Reagan, and there was more like dog whistle stuff. And I think that's where it comes from today. I think the left,
because they were racist and they're like this paragon of what Republicans.
And when you have a country like ours that is just bifurcated between right and like right Republican Democrat, it's like, well, all the racists are on this side and all the commies are on this side, and all of like it's really dumb and doesn't serve any of us well. But I think that's how we think, where other countries have a lot more parties, and it can be like, I was thinking of this example too. So my favorites was in France. You had the National Front, Le Pen's National Front on the right, far right, and you had Mélenchon's far left, came together in a vote in parliament to overturn the COVID restrictions from like this centrist Macron party that's basically kind of our Democrats in a way. And they did it together, and they didn't do it begrudgingly. They like saluted each other and clapped and cheered in their parliament, I whatever you call it. And like, to me, that's beautiful. Like, that's a beautiful thing, because you had people who are on different sides of the political aisle, but like came together to stop like honestly an evil.
It's so funny. I know so many people who like hate that, and they're so like Macron, and they like hate Le Pen and anything.
Oh God, I can't. I would vote for Le Pen or Mélenchon over Macron. Like that like, those are just my politics. Like, I don't give a shit.
Like, they like think it's a tragedy.
Yeah, like I could vote for a Republican and I could vote for a socialist, but I cannot vote for any of these Democrats. Well, I kind of like RFK, but we'll see what happens with that.
Me too.
Yeah, a lot of people. RFK is interesting appeal, but like the Democratic Party, what I've been saying on the show is I don't like Republicans, but I fucking hate Democrats. So that's just kind of where I've been. Rokan is okay. But so that's really, we're kind of all over the place here, which is good. I'm fine with that. Oh, I wanted to bring up, where's 243? I thought I made a note here about the axe, because that is the scariest part of this. I was trying to find earlier in the show where it says right here. So it's saying like what fascism is, there's political, economic, and spiritual forces of the nation, right? Like that's what it's. So those are the sticks. Those are the sticks that make the bundle. A state that reposes upon the support of millions of individuals who recognize its authority and are continually conscious of its power. That is the axe at the head of the bundle of sticks, which in Roman times was the like capital punishment. It was like, you're strong, but the state is stronger. Like the axe, we can cut you in half. And that's
and does that is there any state that exists today that isn't that? I mean, that's such a general statement. Like the perpetual consciousness of the power of the state. I mean, I have that all the time, and maybe that's just because I'm like a paranoid weirdo. But
no, I don't think so. I think COVID exposed a lot of that. Like, you had countries like Australia, New Zealand, who are like forcing their people into camps. But I think state power, I mean, I don't know like every country, but the state constantly reminds you of its power. I mean, look at our legal, like if you look at a criminal case, it's like the United States of America versus Smith. Like it's the state against you. There's an interesting take on that in the Anarchy Handbook about like changing the legal system in that way and making it more about individuals, but not something to get into now. It's all about like insurance and stuff like that. But I always did find that strange, where it's like someone commits a crime against you and you might not even be part of the case. Like I have to tell that to clients all the time. Like I'm a lawyer. I do civil law. In my case, it's very much the client. But if there's a pending, equal criminal case that comes out of the same set of facts, That's for the prosecutor to decide if you're even involved in that. Like
Sure.
you have very little, and it's a very strange concept to me. And I'm a lawyer, like I went to law school, and this is like a strange thing to me, where it's not like you versus that person; it's the power of the state versus that person,
right?
And they can do things like drop charges without you being like without your input. It's insane to me. It's like you didn't suffer. Like you're not the victim. I'm the victim, and you're deciding to drop charges because of like political reasons stuff. It's really insane.
But I think that there's that thing of like they are you, right? They are the people in conception.
But I don't give a shit about the people. I'm a person. Like I want like my like in this instance, the people were not harmed. I was harmed.
Right.
You were harmed. I get it though. I get how it could also be good. Like it's also the resources of the state, which also screws over defendants who could be innocent and have to settle and plea because they don't have the resources of the state. So
absolutely.
Anyway, I want to get that last line in because I do think that's important. We could do more fascist talk. We're at an hour and a half now, so I think we should wrap it up here. But this was good. I told Joe, when he's not here, I do more political stuff. He likes to talk. I hope he hears this. He's be like, so like, what are your inspirations for your music? He wants to talk about like that kind of stuff, and I want to be like,
well, this is my inspiration for music, so it's fine.
I'm teasing you, Joe. I love you. We have a great show. I just like that. Sometimes he gets annoyed when I start talking about like I don't give a shit what they're doing in Ukraine. It's like, Ben, we're talking with a painter.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. All right, Anthony. Thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Fight the crits and stay reckless.
Okay.
My friend.
See ya.
See ya.